Your what?
Start recording, which it has.
Oh, okay. All right, so I'm going to go to share screen. Okay, can everyone see the picture?
We can. It's perfect.
Okay, so you can see my PowerPoint. Okay, so I'm Ellen, as you know already, I suppose. And I'm just going to talk about the FKT that I attempted on the Colombia Plateau Trail. It was a little bit more than an FKT, I guess, because no one has done the whole thing from end to end as a pedestrian. So I was going for an OKT at the same time. As you probably already know, I didn't actually accomplish it, but sometimes the first try is always a recon anyways. This is just me with my son, my oldest son, who came out from Hawaii to run with me, and this was at the very beginning. Although it seems that I started wrong. Let me start at the actual beginning. There we go. I'll get this down. So anyways, I attempted this in September of 2018. I don't remember the exact dates. I think it was the 24th and the 23rd of September, something like that. And I'm just going to talk about why I did it, what the planning involved, the logistics, and some obstacles that weren't necessarily overcome, but they were there. And then show you a whole bunch of cool pictures. And please feel free to ask me questions or interrupt in the middle of it. That's perfectly fine, especially when there's just a few of us. So who am I? I'm just this old lady who likes to run. And I've been running for about 10 years now. And I started to run when I moved from the US to Australia. And I always wanted to be a runner, but never had the patience. I did a lot of long distance backpacking and long distance hiking and day hiking and so forth, but I wasn't a runner. So I moved out there by myself and thought, I'm going to be a runner. So I did start running, and then before too long figured out it makes sense for me to run on trails. And I've just fallen in love with it since then. And every time I do a distance or did a distance, I would want to do more and more and more and more as it goes on, to the point where I'd love to run across the country at some point, but that's for another story. I also hold the first FKT for doing the, depending on who you talk to, John Wayne Trail. That's now the Palos to Cascades Trail. Goes from Tico, Washington to North Bend. And I did that in 2018. So I was kind of left with, well, what do I do now? And that's what I'm going to talk about. The Colombia Plateau Trail is a really interesting trail. And you can see, can you guys see, you can see my cursor too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. So this is the Iron Horse Trail, or Palos to Cascades Trail, John Wayne Trail, whatever you want to call it, that I did in 2017. And it crosses over the Colombia Plateau Trail. Or actually, the Colombia Plateau Trail crosses over it on a very flimsy bridge here. So it goes about 130 miles from just south of Spokane all the way down to Pasco. There's a section right here that is proposed to be finished. I don't know when, because it kind of stops and there's some public, private property there. So they need to acquire the land or something, or get a rite of passage there. So you might ask, why would I want to do this? again, when I did the Palos de Cascades Trail, I was crossing under this bridge where I was trying to reach my husband, who was my crew, and I had no phone signal. He had no phone signal. I was out of fluid. I was out of food, and we thought that was a road crossing where he was going to meet me. And then it turned out it wasn't a road. It was just some abandoned trail. And right at that moment, I also saw a rattlesnake that I yelled at. And got my way up to what I later found out is the Colombia Plateau Trail, and walked about a half a mile to a road and just hoped that William would figure out to go to the end of that trail. And he did. So he was there. That was a happy story. But anyways, it sparked in my mind, what is this trail? Is this like a long distance trail? And then the next year, that was in 2017, the next year wait a minute, I'm screwing up my years.
It's okay.
I know, I have to think. So that was in 2017, 2016. And then the next year when I actually did the Palos de Cascades Trail, I was doing a road walk at night, and my crew was meeting me at such and such time and gave me food walking and said, too bad you can't get in the car yet. So as I was walking along, I ran into a local rancher that I knew about because he didn't like the trails because it goes through part of his ranch property. So anyways, had a conversation with him for about a half an hour, and he said, why don't you just do the Colombia Plateau Trail instead? And I said, what's that? Is that, this abandoned trail? And he said, no, it's not abandoned. He said, it's quite developed. So I said, maybe I'll do that. So that's where the whole idea kind of came up. And here is just a little bit of the planning that went on. So I had my hopes up that it was a really well-developed trail. It turns out it wasn't, not at all. And I found that out when I started talking to someone at the parks. And these are just our conversations, just to kind of show you, we went back and forth quite a bit. And there's a whole lot of sections where there's trestles that are not accessible and/or tunnels. The tunnels are accessible, but almost nobody uses this trail. So all I could think about is cougars hiding in the tunnel. That's all I could think about. The snakes I didn't care about. I just didn't want to run into cougars in the tunnels. Outside of the tunnel, I was okay with. So a lot of talking to parks person who was really helpful, and along with Cal Topo, which if you were there for Celia's presentation last week, she talked about making maps with Cal Topo, which is really, really useful. And also Google Maps to see the stuff that Cal Topo didn't show. And here's the Cal Topo map. And I actually put the link on there. So once this is on YouTube, you can feel free to copy and paste that. I kind of truncated it all, but there's a whole lot of entries there, as you can see. I mean, you can see I was so specific. I wrote, this was all what was supposed to happen. Things didn't necessarily happen this way, but I wrote where I could get food. I wrote where there was a toilet that wasn't a bush, where I was going to pick up certain pacers and trailheads, winery. This was really important, although I never saw it. And then where I was supposed to finish and so forth. And then you can see where it says John Wayne Trail Junction rattlesnakes. I remember that rattlesnake I had to yell at a few years ago.
So did you go from north to south or?
Yes. Yep. Went from north to south. I don't know why I did it that way. I think it was sort of, oh, I know why I did it that way. It was the logistics of it because my son came out from Honolulu to hang out with me and pace me. And we could get a cheaper flight for him to fly back from Pasco than Seattle. So that was the whole reason.
Something
Otherwise,
has to decide it.
what's that?
Something has to decide it.
Yeah, yeah. When I do it again, and I'll go the opposite way because most of the tunnels, or all of the tunnels and most of the trestles are in the southern section, and I would rather get that over with early when, I wouldn't be freaking out at every noise and so forth, because that's what happens when you're tired. You start freaking out at, a bush moving or something because you're so tired. So this is the recon that I did around February of 2018. I just went out and checked out the trail, and I saw this really huge ballast rock that I thought, oh man, that looks shitty. But then I thought, whatever, it won't be so bad. Yeah, famous last words. And then this is an example of one of the really high trestles that you can't cross. On either side of the trestle, it's chain link fenced up. And if I was the type that would just like go over the fence, I think I would still be sort of weary, because if you get way out to the middle and then there's some boards missing or something, I think I'd be pretty annoyed that I went through all that effort. And it's illegal to do that, and so anyways, I wouldn't do that. So you had to actually climb up on property that may or may not be public or private. I couldn't get any straight answers from anyone on that. But it turns out I didn't cross this particular trestle anyways, or I didn't get to this area. So after my recon, I said, yeah, sure, this seems really doable. I can do this, no problem. And started making the plans. So kind of talking about everything that I took with me. The most important thing I will say, if you ever plan on doing anything like this, is your crew. If you decide to do a solo, that's fine, but I was not considering that. There was no way, because I knew some of the areas, and some of the locals really are not too crazy about people coming around their land, even though the state has already given the state park owns the right of way through people's land. There's ranchers and locals that don't want anyone there. So I didn't really want to be doing it alone at certain points. Plus, there's no resupply points. So you'd have to carry pretty much everything you need for all that distance, and that's really difficult. So I had a pretty extensive crew that I'll show you in a couple minutes. This crew member right here is my son, who came in from Honolulu on the red eye, and that was before we left the house. He was just sitting there napping. I couldn't even show that picture. This was all the food I packed. It doesn't count what people brought for me, because there is people that, people would bring me food when they came to pace, and or something from the store. I can honestly say I probably didn't even eat half of that food, but I knew that when you're out there for a long time, even 50 miles, never mind 130 miles, you tend to look at the food you packed and say, "Ooh, that's gross. I don't want that." So I gave myself a lot of choices. As far as the equipment I carried, really nothing special. I use Ultimate Direction backpacks, running packs, and the shoes I was wearing at the time, I did have some sponsorship via SRC through the Brooks. I was on the Brooks team for a few years. So I was wearing Brooks Pure Grit. I really loved the shoes until they stopped making my size because I have really small feet. So I purchased the next size up, which was the stupidest thing I could have ever done. The next half size up. And you'll see why that was a stupid idea. But you can probably guess already. But the other thing with those shoes is there's not enough cushion for that ballast rock. So there's no way I would ever consider wearing a sort of standard trail running shoe on this trail. Got to go with something with tons of cushion. Liquids, I do get some sponsorship from the Gnarly company, and they make a Gnarly Hydrate, which is electrolytes. I tend to not drink water, even if I just go for a run for an hour, because I lose electrolytes so fast. Water is just a waste of my time. And I did drink a lot of ginger beer, which I really like. So this was my crew. This was maybe, it was in the morning, the second morning. That's why everyone looks a little tired, yet maybe a little bit chipper. And I'll talk about all the other crew as we go through. So, crew, Gretchen. Probably many of you know Gretchen Wallace. She was the boss, absolutely. And I told her, I gave her, the right to tell me what to do and tell everybody else what to do. She's pretty good at that. She paced me at a lot of runs before. So she was the crew chief, and I can't thank her enough for everything she did during that run. Kay, who's a good friend of mine, she works for Northwest Trail Runs. You may or may not know her. She was the logistical brain. She was the smarty when it came to setting up where everyone was going to be met and so forth. She was there for about 24 hours, and then she had to go home. My son, who was the morale booster, he's a very happy kid, actually. Well, he's not a kid. He's probably older than you guys. I write here, he's no pussy Bambi, and that's a family thing where his wife years ago, she couldn't say anything. She doesn't say anything bad. So all she could say is, "You're a pussy Bambi." It was like saying, "You're an asshole," except in her words. So that's our secret family thing. Not so secret anymore. Adam works for Shoes and Feet. I put down as a snake whisperer, not, and you'll see why. Marianne, she paced me all night. She paced me from about 8 o'clock at night until I think 9 o'clock the next morning. And she just told me crazy ass stories the whole time. I told her, I said, I don't even care if they're true or not, just talk to me. Because after a while, you just can't even have a conversation with anyone anymore. And towards the end, I had some other friends come out. So Paul, who's quite entertaining. If you know him, you know what I'm talking about. Dan, who also works for Northwest Trail Runs, he came out on his bike and took orders for snacks. And Shane, who made the Cal Topo map with me, he was not only the map maker, but he paced me for quite a bit the second morning and kind of kept on, when we were doing a road walk where the trail dislocated, kept on pushing me back over to the side when I was falling asleep walking in the road. And so where I started, as Celia asked and I mentioned, was at the northern section of the trail. The northern section for about 20 miles is pretty well developed, and it goes through the Turnbull National Wildlife Refuge. Very beautiful trails, so much wildlife there, bird life and so forth. It's absolutely beautiful. And I remember thinking, oh, this is so pleasant. This is going to be a great run. And this is the picture I showed you at the beginning in Era. My son started with me. He was originally going to run for maybe what would equal a marathon the first day, and then the second day he was going to run with me some more. So he ran with me for about 7 miles at the beginning, and then I said, you know, I just want to run by myself for a little bit and kind of enjoy it. So I ran about another 7 miles alone, and then he picked up again with me and stayed with me for about 30 miles altogether. So the Colombia Plateau Trail, obviously, in doing this whole thing, has so many challenges. Snakes were one of the challenges. This is just a bull snake. It's not a rattlesnake, but there is rattlesnakes out there. And it was quite sunny on the first full day that I was out there. Actually, the second full day too. The rocks. This is a section of the trail that on either side kind of, you know, caved in, or maybe there was, okay. And maybe there was a bridge over there and caved in and so forth. This isn't the norm. Most of the trail was actually just, you know, graded rocks. So this is what the rocks were. And it probably doesn't look so bad in this picture, but they were actually maybe like 3-4 inch ballast rock, which is a nightmare. And if you went over to the sides, you got those little, I forget what they call, but I call them little hitchhikers. They get on your socks and your pants and so forth, those prickly things. And this just, it went on for 70 miles. These rocks went on for 70 miles. It was just stupid. Apparently, the state park is going to eventually, I want to make sure what we're doing for time, the state park is eventually going to remove them and make it a nice graded trail, but it's all about money. And hardly anyone ever uses the trail. So if more people use the trail, maybe they do it. This probably shows a better picture of the ballast rock because you have people for scale here. So this is me with my son and Adam. When Adam came out, so I picked him up as a pacer. Adam didn't last very long because I broke him. So yes, this poor guy, he's still broken, or he's still healing. He was about to step on a snake. And I said, Adam, snake. And the thing is, I knew he was petrified of snakes. And I thought if he stepped on it, it would scare the crap out of him. But instead, me telling him he was going to step on a snake scared the living daylights out of him. And he jumped up, and when he jumped down, he twisted his ankle in such a way that he actually ruptured his Achilles. So yeah. Luckily, yeah, yikes. So luckily, we were only about 1.5 miles away from where we were meeting the crew. So here is my son piggybacking him out the whole way. And because he couldn't, you know, we tried both supporting him with him walking, he couldn't. It was too bad. Luckily, Adam's a thin guy, so it wasn't so bad. But my son at the same time was having knee pain, so I actually ended up breaking him too. I was fine. So that was one of the biggest challenges. That was maybe about 20 miles into the run is when Adam got hurt. And I hadn't had much thought about what would happen if a crew member got hurt. Never mind me. I mean, I did, but not really. And it did put a big hole in things. So my son ended up having to pace me longer because it was getting late, before I picked up my next pacer. And we were meeting her elsewhere, and there was hardly any phone signal out there to call people and say, hey, can you come somewhere else? So that was interesting. So again, I can't stress enough about the challenge of the rocks. It was so bad. And the other picture I put here was actually towards the end, but I kind of included it here because it shows you what happens when you're out doing a long distance run like this is, here I am stopping to take a picture. And it was because I was just so tired. That's all I could do is just like stop and take pictures. Route finding, or the route being inaccessible. So you can see up here where this whole trestle was closed off, and we had to come down in this long grass, not knowing what's in the long grass. That was super interesting. And then we got to the road. It's a dirt road that leads to a farmer's land. And on all the maps, and even on the road, the entrance to this dirt road, it says it's public property, it's open to the public. But when we got to the car of the crew, they said, you got to get in the car now. We got to go. And I was like, why? And apparently the owner of the property said, I have a crazy dog, and that dog, might come down and harass you. And it never happened, but we just got in the car and drove to the end of the road, which was maybe 0.2 of a mile away. But it was a whole weird situation. And I'm probably remembering some of it incorrectly because this was the second morning where I was loopy and tired. And it would be interesting to know or hear what my crew remembers about everything. So now I'm just gonna show basically some pictures and kind of talk about them. This picture, I know it's a really bad picture.
Are you sure it is a porcupine?
It's a picture of a porcupine, but what I wanted to stress here is this was like, I don't know, like the wee hours of the morning of the first night. And it kind of stresses how I was seeing things right then, which wasn't very good. Everything was fuzzy. I mean, obviously this is my camera that couldn't take the picture, but it was a porcupine that both Marianne and I saw. And one of the biggest struggles, of course, in the middle of the night is when it's just so dark. You just feel like there's no hope and it's never going to end. It just goes on and on and on and on. And this was in the morning, the second morning, when I think in this picture, I was trying to negotiate with Gretchen, can I just stop? And she said, no, you can't. So I did go on for a while longer. And the picture, this picture here is absolutely beautiful, and it shows you the contrast between the northern and the southern section. So the northern section up near Spokane, there's still a lot of evergreens, and it's a little bit more what I would call like transitional from sort of woodsy to desert. And then, of course, as you go further south, it's very desert-like. This was the sunset number one. I did get to see 2 sunsets, only 1 sunrise though. And then this is me with my son again, and it's probably an interesting way for a mother and daughter to bond, but what the heck. A lot of beautiful plants out there. Even though it was, the beginning of fall, there was still a lot of plants flowering. It's quite beautiful. I think I might have taken this picture. Any pictures that don't show credit to someone means I probably took them. This is just a picture at night. And this was somewhat early in the run, when I wasn't too disgusted in the rocks yet. I was still running. Towards the end, I wasn't running at all. It was just all walking. Sometimes staggering. Another beautiful picture of the countryside, sort of somewhere in the middle of the trail. It really is a picturesque area. I didn't even remember seeing this barn, but Shane took this picture at some point. Really beautiful picture. And this was at night when I was getting to the point where I wasn't feeling too good. I had eaten a lot of olives that day because I do like olives when I'm running, but apparently you can eat too many olives. And I was going and visiting behind the fence a lot. I appreciated that part's not in the picture. So we've got a car here and there's someone standing here. Pretty cool photo that Kay took. This was early on in the run before I broke Adam. Same thing here. I don't remember where this is. That's another problem with a run like this is, you normally look back even when you get home, and sometimes you can't remember where things were because you just kind of walk like a zombie through all of it. And then this was towards the end down in the Pasco area. At that point, I would try to run for maybe 30 seconds, and then I'd end up walking no matter how motivated I was to finish. So I started around 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday, and around noontime on Sunday, I had been doing a lot of road walking, and we were getting to the point of me having to go and do the tunnels, and I was just done with it. I just couldn't go on. It might have even been later in the day than that. So I got in the car with Gretchen, and some of our other crew got into a different car, and we went further up the trail so that I would finish the next, I think it was 12 or 15 miles before the finish. So I skipped about 28 miles, 27 miles of the whole trail. And it was the toughest section that was coming up that I skipped. And I just, looking back, it was stupid that I didn't do it, but that always happens, I mean, whether you DNF on a race or whatever, you're always like, no, I could have done it. But at that moment, I felt like if I went on, I was going to die, which is ridiculous. I wasn't going to die, or I was going to cause some permanent damage to my body, it's absolutely ridiculous. But at the time, that's how I thought, and this is what the rocks did to me. So my foot hurt, but it was covered with a bandage the whole time, but I never bothered to look at the bandage, which I will never not do that again. And that night that I finished, before I was done, before I took a shower. I took off the tape that I had on there, and I looked and I was like, what the hell? No wonder why my foot hurt so bad. And it was because the shoes I was wearing were just a little bit too big, and all that, your feet turning on the ballast rocks just caused these terrible blisters. This blister, I never popped it. I was pretty proud of that. I never got tempted to pop it. It took maybe 3 weeks to totally go away. It was pretty bad. I never had one like that before. Even with long distance hiking, I didn't get blisters, or not like that. So the recovery consisted of taking care of my foot, my legs, and eating a lot of food. So my son hung around for a couple of days, and I hung around for a couple of days before I drove back to Seattle. And we mostly just ate a lot. Went out to lunch, and then of course wine. Life isn't complete without cheese and wine, if you like that kind of stuff. So what next? I haven't attempted any, I can end this, stop share. So I haven't attempted any other FKT since then, because I had a couple things in the plans. One was I started to get infatuated with the Kettle Valley Trail up in Canada, up in BC, that is about 300 miles, 500 kilometers, and did a little recon of that maybe a year and a half ago. And I wanted to do it as a solo and just have a cart, but I realized there's a lot of single track there, so a cart isn't going to work. So I've kind of put that on hold. But I had plans to do the Colombia Plateau Trail again in either May or June of this year, but obviously
You're not sure
anything. And I thought to myself, when we went into this whole stay at home, I thought, well, there's nobody on the Colombia Plateau Trail. I'll go out and do that. But it is owned by the state parks, so it's closed. And I know in the remote section, nobody would ever know, but I don't feel like that's cool to, go and do that and then publicize I did it and I broke the law. So I am going to do that as soon as I can, and hopefully maybe sometime this summer or in the early fall, everything will open up and I can attempt that again.
So what would you change next time?
Shoes.
Yeah.
And seriously, that is the biggest thing. Absolute biggest thing is I would tighten my shoes. And I've been wearing Ultra for a couple of years, and I'm pretty happy with their cushioning. But also, I'm the type that I tend to wear my shoes very loose. I just like freedom, and I would tighten the shit out of them, and I would keep on tightening them throughout the run, because as uncomfortable and constricting that might make your feet feel, I think it would have solved a little bit of the problem. And let's see, what else would I do differently? I'll go south to north. I think it'll make a difference, because getting through the hardest part first will be a lot better. Another reason why I was happy to do north to south is because maybe from north to south, about 40 miles into the run, you go through some property that's owned by a family that isn't very welcoming, and I wasn't thrilled about going through their property when I was really tired, so I wanted to do that early. But I think by now, because it's the third time. That was the third time I had gone through that area. I think people, it's a small, there's not much population out there. They've heard of me or they kind of know me. So they're like, she's like crazy lady just running, no big deal. She's not going to, come and take away our rights or whatever, or take away our land. But yeah, I think I would go south to north. I didn't need as many pacers as I had, but people wanted to come out, so I wasn't going to say no because it was great to have company. I spent almost no time by myself. I ran I think it was just that 7 miles by myself. Otherwise, I always had a pacer with me, and I suppose purists will look at that and be like, you should have done more of it by yourself. But it was fun. It was fun doing it that way. I wouldn't do it differently, or I wouldn't have less pacers, or I wouldn't be disappointed if I had less pacers next time. Let me just say that. But if it was the same way as far as almost the whole time I was with other people, I would be just as happy. I would be just as happy because it's still a huge feat. I mean, it's a lot of work, and it is very emotionally draining going through all of that.
Did you have a question, Liz?
Sorry?
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious as to like what drew you to these like long distance, like they're maybe not like the most well known or like most like obvious trails, but they're like there's something that you discovered and you found this passion for. And like what really draws you to a trail? What makes you seek it out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like the idea of doing a trail that other people don't find attractive. I don't know. And I think part of it is there's less people. So when I moved out to Washington State, I stopped doing a lot of backpacking because I felt like there's a lot of areas where I don't want to go by myself, especially in the winter. Like I used to do a lot of winter backpacking, and I'm from New England, so in New Hampshire. But here, it's too dangerous to go by yourself. But I do like to be alone. I like to go out and do things alone. So even though I didn't do this by myself, I had pacers with me. There's in the recon and the discovery of the trails, there's a lot of lonerness about it that I enjoy. I enjoy that you can go for hours, just run for hours and hours without seeing another person, which sometimes it's kind of annoying or sad. You're like, what do I even sound like anymore? What's my voice sound like? Because you haven't talked to another person. But I think I like that. And, I guess I like suffering a little bit, but probably we all do because we're runners.
That's fair.
Because going through the suffering gives you a feeling of accomplishment afterwards when you've done it, and it gives you a high, maybe not the suffering part, but the actual running part, and the sort of seeing new areas and so forth.
Yeah. I thought one thing that was really striking was just how beautiful and desolate the area was. And it's just like an area of the state that nobody ever thinks of going to. And it's just kind of like the forgotten part of Washington.
Yeah.
And then you kind of were like, wow, this, you get to gain a whole new appreciation of something that's so underappreciated, which is really cool.
Yeah, exactly. And that is a huge attraction to me too, is that, it's an underappreciated area. I mean, I love the mountains here. They're really beautiful, but when I first came out, I was super attracted to the desert area because I come from an area where there's nothing even almost like desert. It's all heavily wooded. So I was just like, oh my God, this is so cool. I've got to get me some more of this.
Say someone didn't want to go out and run the whole trail.
Mhm.
Which bits would you recommend going to check out?
So, no doubt the northern section is really spectacular. I mean, those few pictures that I showed don't do justice to the area, but the Malcolm Turnbull Refuge is just so picturesque. I mean, I was just enthralled with. There's so many birds out there. It's crazy. It's really nice. But then also, I like the middle of it where there's nothing except fields, and occasionally you might see some cattle. Um, there's not a whole lot out there, but yet there is. You see these rocky outcroppings and lots of tall grasses and wildflowers. It's just really beautiful. I mean, if you're looking for a challenge, I would say start somewhere in the middle and just go north or south. But if you're looking for beauty and really excellent running terrain, I would say the northern 20 miles are really beautiful. And there's some camping areas around there and so forth.
Cool. All right.
I'm really disappointed that I can't go out and do it again.
I know.
You know,
Well, but that was September. Was it September, right? So maybe.
well, I wanted to do it first I was saying May of this year, but then I pushed it to June because of all this stuff. But now it's looking like June isn't going to happen. So maybe September. But in the meanwhile, I do have an attraction to long distance trails, even if it's just regular training. They can be either flat or hilly or whatever. So I want to do some little FKTs around here, just on, there's lots of other rail trails. There's the Centennial Trail. And I'm a big fan of the Toad Pipeline, although that's a pretty short trail. It's not a rail trail. And the interurban trail I run on a lot. Now we live half a mile away from the interurban trail. So things like that I can do in the course of a day or something like that. It would be fun to find something accessible that's up to like 50, 60 miles. So guys, think of anything, let me know.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Ellen.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Definitely get hold of me if you have any other questions or want to see any other pictures or whatever.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
All right. And then if you want to do the trail, get hold of me and I'll give you some intel. And maybe even be on your crew.
I do not like snakes.
I know, that was so terrifying to me. I saw like a little like black garden snake the other day and paused for like 5 minutes, figured out how to get around this snake.
Well, I think I got over snakes when I lived in Australia, and the most dangerous snakes are there. And after a while, you're like, yeah, whatever, close call, but it didn't get me this time. One of these days, they're gonna get me, and I'll just deal with it when it happens.
All right. I'll have you be my snake wrangler.
Yeah.
You can fight the snakes for me.
I'm not sure I'm a snake wrangler, but I'm just not too petrified of them.
I'm gonna stop the recording.